My name is Alyssa Pries. I'm a customer advocate here at LogicManager. And I'm excited to get to talk to you guys about the topic of separation of duties and how to make this key governance area stronger within your organization and some strategies along those lines. So I'm going to also introduce, we have a special guest star today. We're going to talk today about separation of duties, and I've invited my colleague Laura Grinnell here today. So Laura, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about kind of who you are, what you do, and kind of how you're connected to this idea of separation of duties?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Alyssa. Like you said, my name is Laura Grinnell. I'm the ERM Program Manager here at LogicManager. In my previous life, I did spend about 14 years as an auditor in a few different organizations. I am a certified internal auditor and hold a certification in risk management assurance. So I'm really happy to be here today to talk about segregation of duties and also so that we can work through and apply it to some practical examples.
Perfect. Thanks, Laura. Yeah, we're really excited to have Laura here today. She is really the subject matter expert on separation of duties and how to create those within your organization and why those are super important. I want to start out by kind of establishing what separation of duties is, just in case you aren't really sure what that necessarily means. But it really is a security and an internal control principle to make sure that within critical tasks, those are divided amongst different people. There's checks and balances essentially put in place so that it's much harder and hopefully prevents fraud and errors from being occur between the organization, because then you're making sure that it's being reviewed, that the right people have their eyes on it before anything hopefully happens. So the idea is that no single individual would have control over all aspects of critical functions. So Laura and I thought it would be a really fun um, kind of interactive thing to talk with you guys about and give a few different scenarios about what separation of duties is and how we can kind of implement that. But Laura, is there anything else within separation of duties that you wanted to add before we jump into the scenarios?
Yeah, I think one thing that's kind of key to begin is that the concept of segregation of duties is fairly easy to understand, but it is quite challenging in certain situations to implement it practically throughout your organization. And so, one of the things that we want to make sure is that we are thinking through not from the beginning all the way to an end of a process to make sure we're properly segregating all duties.
Perfect. Awesome. And so we're going to talk through three different scenarios here. So I'm going to put the first one up on the screen. And we're going to give you guys an opportunity to test your skills at this idea of separation of duties. So we have Judy here. And the scenario is that she both handles petty cash as well as reconciling expenses. So um, here in a second, we're actually going to ask a couple of questions so that you guys can get a good idea of where you're at on kind of determining what separation of duties is and how you might be able to implement that. So we're going to go ahead and pop up the questions here. We've got the scenario on the screen and then some of the questions here. And we'd love for you guys to just take a moment and try to answer some of those questions. And then we'll go over the answers here. So one of the questions is, what is the risk of letting Judy handle both tasks? And then also, how best do we separate duties? Answer number one, looks like everybody pretty much got here that the answer is C. Judy should or could approve fake expenses and pocket the cash while covering her tracks there. So I think that this is a really good lesson of somebody maybe having too much control over critical tasks. And I think, like Laura said, one of the hardest parts is not just understanding where duties should be separated, but what that kind of looks like in a practical manner. So that's kind of what that second question is. And it looks like we've got a variety of answers. So Laura, do you want to go over why the answer is D in the sense of that different employees should be reconciling different parts of the process.
Yeah, I think something that can be difficult in segregation of duties is that there are lots of ways to segregate duties and there are lots of ways to mitigate risk because that's ultimately what we're trying to do. And so having Judy submit a selfie or a picture every month to make sure that she's monitoring it properly is an option to make sure that things are, maybe has a receipt picture and a picture of her smiling face that she's done it appropriately, as well as having security cameras is a good measure to have in place. But really, the ultimate segregation of duties that we want to have is two separate functions within the organization. And so, while all of the answers have elements of being correct and have parts that are good things to implement, we want to ultimately make sure that people are performing separate functions.
Perfect. Great. Thank you for that, Laura. Now we've kind of bumped up the difficulty here with this next scenario with the IT guy, John. Um so John has the power to approve payments in the accounting system, but also able to create new vendors within the organization. So let's test our hand to see, where the risk lies within this process and how we might be able to properly separate everything. So again, we'll let you guys kind of read through that. The answer is A. John could be creating fake vendors and approving payments to himself. So as we kind of talked about in the first example, that no single person should have administrator control for both these processes here. So Laura, do you want to talk a little bit about the different answers for the second half of like how do we fix this separation of duties? Because the correct answer is D, but I think there is a couple of other very close answers that we could get. Mainly, it looks like there was some people that talked about randomly rotating financial approval duties, which is a very, very good answer as well. So you want to talk through this a little bit more?
Yeah, I definitely think that when you're considering segregation of duties, again, the best option is to have two different people performing these duties. But the question really is, well, I'm in a small organization. How I don't have two people to do these two things. So what can I do to lower and mitigate the risk? And the answer to that is kind of going towards a compensated control aspect. So, while you look at the answers and you can see that the best answer may be D, but if you're in a small organization, you don't have that option. So, the one thing that you want to keep in mind for these compensating controls is that you want to make sure that they fit into the organization, they fit into the process as best as possible. So you think of randomly rotating financial approval duties, this is a great option for that compensating control to make sure that it's not John doing the payment and that person never ends up being John. And so um you think of the answer C, to make John fill out 12 forms, is a good answer to make sure that he's filling out a lot of paperwork. But in order for controls to operate effectively, you want them to be designed effectively. And what I mean by that is putting them within a process rather than kind of layering them on top of a process. And so you don't want to add additional admin burden to someone because that may not be the best pathway to effectively segregate duties and could ultimately slow the process down versus what you ultimately want to do is mitigate the risk.
Yes, I agree. I think it's almost like secret answer E that we didn't put up there of having maybe both and, but also we don't want our controls to be so locked down that it creates inefficiency within our processes, I think, too. I mean, we've all had that where, after 5 minutes, we have to type in our password again, which is obviously ultra secure, but also we can't get our jobs done. So there's a little bit of give and take when it comes to controls and making sure that each duty is segregated properly. So here we've got Lisa here. Lisa is a part of selecting vendors, but also negotiating contracts. So where do we think something could go wrong in this scenario? So the answer is B, that a vendor might be sending Lisa thank you gifts as a result. So Laura, do you want to talk through that a little bit more and what maybe thank you gifts look like? I know we've probably all received, um, a gift card or something for as a thank you, but you want to talk through kind of implications that might have on the organization?
Yeah, you wanna consider the relationship that you have with your vendors. You don't want it to be, um, perceived as something that it's not. You want to maintain that professional boundary, and if you continue to get a lot of gifts and a lot of, basketball tickets or gift baskets at the holidays, some of these are fine up to a point, but when it becomes excessive and it becomes something that, um doesn't really seem kosher across the board is when you wanna take a closer look at that relationship because you don't wanna be perceived as receiving kickbacks from a vendor to give them preferential treatment.
Yeah, exactly. That's why let's look at the answer of answer A. I know there was a couple of answers where we talked about looks like C, where they implement a rule that Lisa must rotate which vendor she chooses, and also that there's a coworker like real time sitting at her desk. So do you want to talk through a couple of those answers, Laura?
Yeah, of course. So I think, again, this is an example of where these are all opportunities to implement compensating controls in an organization, but we really want to focus on the root cause of the issue in this question. And the root cause really is the excessive access that Lisa has. And so, for the first one, we want to, be able to trust our employees. Or I'm sorry, for answer B, we want to make sure that we're trusting our employees, but trust, unfortunately, is not a control. So we want to make sure we have a little bit more control, a few more controls in place for that. And again, we go through rotating vendors, which is an option that would reduce the risk of a potential kickback, for example, or reduce the risk of preferential treatment, but it doesn't reduce the risk completely back to that root cause of the excessive access that Lisa has. And for the fourth one, it would be lovely to have someone sit there and monitor what she's doing, but unfortunately, most companies don't have that level of personnel available to have two people working on the same process all day, every day.
Yeah, definitely probably not the best use of time there. Um I also think too, when it comes to like rotating vendors, it might be a bit of a challenge too, depending on what type of industry you work in, that there might not be a huge selection of vendors that you can choose from as well. So, although like giving multiple vendors opportunities, and try to rotate through sometimes there's not another vendor. Maybe there's only two people that provide that service. So, that could be also a challenge within an organization. So, thank you guys so much for playing along there. Hopefully, that gives you a good idea of kind of what we're talking about today in terms of separation of duties and what this kind of looks like. But I really want to kind of put this into perspective of kind of the real world. So recently, Macy's actually had an incident where single accounting employee that was in charge of small package delivery costs. And they actually made an error in the accounting. And instead of going back and saying, hey, I need to fix this, they just continued to make that mistake to cover it up. So sometimes fraud or people do have good intentions. They just maybe made a mistake. But unfortunately, this mistake happened over the course of 3 years, which also had some implications as to like leadership getting bonuses and things that they didn't really deserve, which this person didn't seem to be a part of that bonus structure. So I don't think he was doing or they were doing it to kind of get that kickback. It was just really a mistake and they wanted to keep covering that mistake, unfortunately. So Laura, anything that you want to kind of add in terms of things that you've kind of seen in the real world or kind of real life scenarios?
Yeah, I think it is important to recognize that some segregation of duties issues are not always made maliciously or fraudulently, but just because you may have people that are untrained or people that are trying to do the best thing in the wrong way. And so I've definitely seen several SOD conflicts throughout my career in different organizations. I think it varies on the size, the type of SOD violation that you tend to see. One, when I was working in manufacturing at the refinery that was there, you had a small team of personnel that worked at that refinery. So you had the same person ordering some spare parts as they were checking in the spare parts and adding them into the inventory. And so there's no malicious intent here for the most part. You know, you want again to trust your employees, but again, you want to make sure that you are adding those compensating controls in place, whether that is kind of a monthly recon of the inventory that was added to the purchases made, um, or something like that that will will give you comfort that that risk is not present. And then, you know, in a more complex organization, something that's very common to see is that monitoring of role changes. You know, if someone changes a role, someone goes on vacation temporarily, access is given, and it perhaps can turn into excessive access because the access is then not taken away again. And so you want to have good processes in place for granting access and taking away access, that it's a two-part step, not just one, and making sure that you have monthly, quarterly, biannual, whatever works for your organization, reviews in place of that access to mitigate that.